Okay, we're gonna wrap up. We got a couple more slides in this part. Again, this is looking at the segment where we see classical liberalism start to transition into modern liberalism, right? We're looking at some of the issues that people are responding to. So, we already talked about a bunch of stuff yesterday. We're going to continue today. Voting. So, in a democracy, who's allowed to vote?
Well, almost everyone, though.
Almost everyone. Meaning?
Well, there's some.
Let's specify.
There's some people who don't have a voting rights yet.
Who are they?
Up
like here.
Underage people.
People under the age of
18.
Okay, who else can't vote?
In America, just we have probably some black people.
What? Nowhere. I'm sorry, you can't vote. You can't vote in the U.S.
Oh man! Now, because we don't want to spread misinformation, there's no law that states the color of your skin determines whether or not you vote. But a good point to make and a connection, because we can always build on these things, is that at one point in time, the color of your skin did make a difference whether or not you could vote. Okay? Which how do we feel about that? Is that appropriate? What does the color of your skin have to do with your ability to decide who should be in government? Does it have any correlation? Is there any connection? No, right? Sorry, what? Unless you paint, sure. If you're being incredibly offensive, maybe you don't have the mental capacity to vote. Okay. Yes.
Immigrants don't vote either, right?
Immigrants. So if they're not a citizen yet, right? And is that, Misha? Come on. Okay, and is that reasonable?
And you were like, what?
Well,
That's what you did.
We're gonna be on it.
Keep that in there.
Yeah, we never make edits on this channel. I don't know. I don't have an editor. Come on. Okay. So,
download one.
is it fair to say someone who isn't a citizen of the country can't vote? Some of us are saying yes. Most of us are saying yes. Why is that though? Why do we think that?
They're not a citizen that, like, they don't be living in shit.
Yeah, maybe they don't actually live in that country. How do we know they actually know the rules and the regulations and the culture? Right? Do they even know how to engage in the voting process? And especially on the point of, if they're not actually going to stay in Canada, why should they get to say who governs the place? Right? So it's challenging. Anyways, this first point here. So during the 19th century in Britain, more and more men were given the right to vote. At times it was limited to those who had property, they owned something. Okay, as opposed to now, an 18-year-old could be in a lot of debt, own nothing, be a bum living in their parents' basement, eating Cheetos, scrolling on Instagram, TikTok, whatever. That person can still vote. Should they be allowed to?
For some reason, yes.
Yes. Right? Even people who don't bother to inform themselves on any of the politics, on any of the platforms, they're still allowed to vote. Part of that is we have equal access to this right. You have a right to be able to say who should lead you in a democracy. Even if you choose not to take care of the responsibility of learning about the party that you're voting for, why you're voting, what your beliefs are. That's to an extent, that's what this course is designed to do, to teach you your ideology. What do you actually believe? What philosophy do you have for the world and how people should act in it? That's what this course is designed to do. Whether or not it's actually achieving that, I'll leave that up to debate. Eventually, though, in England, we're just looking at the example in England, the right to vote was extended to working class men in 1884. So maybe these guys didn't own property, but they had jobs. They were being productive, responsible citizens. And I think there's something to be noted that at some point in history, the philosophy may have been that if you're not a productive and capable citizen, maybe you shouldn't be able to vote. If you can't run your own household and run your own life, what say should you have about the way a city or country is run? So going back to the example of the person who eats Cheetos in their parents' basement and scrolls through social media, video games all day, if you're not actually actively running your own life, should you get a say in who gets to run the country? Maybe you should, maybe you shouldn't, right? It's not up for us to decide. But I think there was a point in time in history where they acknowledged that if you own property, if you can run a household, maybe you have some knowledge and capacity for how a country should be run. Additionally, on the topic of women, so John Stuart Mill wrote an essay called The Subject of Women. He strongly argued for equality of the sexes. The political parties at the time didn't want to include women in the voting process because women vote conservative. And the conservatives don't want to include women because they prefer a traditional role. Okay, so there's this bit of conundrum. Now you have to understand that the conservatives want to keep things the same. They're opposite to the people who were classical liberals at the time, or liberals in general, who want to add new ideas. And so the conservatives say, well, they're not going to vote for us anyways, so they shouldn't vote. Nor do we want them voting per se, right? And obviously the term and meaning of conservative can change over time. In Britain, women over the age of 21 were given the right to vote in 1928, which is not that long ago. And it's not clear to me, I don't recall the research I did, there's a link. It's not clear to me if that was all women or just, white women, women who own property or whatever it was, right? So I'd have to go back in there eventually. Welfare state is very important to modern liberalism. It's the idea that the state, the government, should do something to address inequality, should do something to address when people are incapable or unable to work and provide for themselves. And how do they do that? Typically they do that through taxation. Typically they do that through social programs. So let's say let's say you're raising a child by yourself, which is incredibly difficult to do. And there's a lot of good research out there that suggests that it makes the life of that child a lot more challenging. What is the government's role in making sure that that child is taken care of? Should we take care of that child? You're shaking your head yes. And why is that? Because it's not always obvious, right?
It deserves to have a life, so we should take care of it.
They deserve to have a life?
Yeah.
But who should take care of that? Right? Should all of us have to pay in for someone else's decision making?
No.
No. So then how does it get taken care of?
That's a good question.
Yeah, so if there's only one parent, let's say the other parent dies, or there's a divorce. Now there's children with only one parent. Is it important to make sure that those children get a good opportunity at life?
Yeah.
Yeah. The challenge here is how do we ensure that?
Just child support.
That's between spouses, right? So like if you divorce, you can get child support, alimony. I don't think that existed back then, especially if there's no technology. You could just like move to a different neighborhood and no one would know you exist anymore because there's no cell phones to track you or keep an eye on you. So welfare state is the idea that the government should step in through taxation and social programs to help out. And it doesn't just have to be helping out for children. What if you lose your job, right? Like what if you need some supplementary income in the time being? Hello. Yes, the office or just okay, sounds good. Okay, sounds good. Thank you. Bye. Thank you for that pause. You are good to go. You're being excused, and there's a set of keys for you at the office afterwards.
Oh,
Okay.
what was going on?
Yeah, so what do you do when you lose your job? How do you make sure you can get some money while you're out of work? So for those of you who do have a job, maybe you see on your pay stubs you lose a bit of money to EI, employment insurance. And that's so that if you are ever in between a job, that you can apply for that and get some money. The trick is though, what if you're never out of a job and you're always paying? Then what? Like I've never applied for employment insurance, but I put a lot of money towards it. Should I get some of that returned to me later on?
This closet. Is there a assignment or anything we're gonna be doing today?
Yeah, I'll give it to you. So that one will just be for
You want the charger?
Yeah, can you use it?
Yo, kid, can I go get us a binder from the library real quick?
sure. Yeah, so let's say you get laid off. That's another reason, right? That might be out of your control. The company wants to relocate, they lay off everyone. It's not your fault, you were a good employee, you showed up, you did your job. Right, that's why employment insurance exists. But, you know, an interesting thing that happened during the COVID lockdowns, all the COVID stuff is they started saying, they were playing with the idea that, hey, if you lose your job because you don't want to take the vaccine, well then you shouldn't get employment insurance. You're making a choice to not get vaccinated. But for those of you who work, did any of you get to check mark a box that says yes or no to employment insurance? No, like you don't get to choose that. So how do you deal with that situation? Right, if I'm working and part of my paycheck is going away from me, from my pocket, to the government, to people who are on employment insurance, and when the need arises for me to use it for whatever I choose, maybe I didn't want to get vaccinated, maybe I hurt my leg, maybe I got laid off, maybe I just want to be a bum for a little bit, right? That's fun every now and then. Whose decision, whose right is it to say yes or no to the money that I earn, right? Like it's your money that they take. The goal of a welfare state, this third point here, is to maintain productivity, national unity, and social peace. Right, the last thing you want is people sitting around and being unproductive. So the last 2 years of lockdowns was very detrimental for some countries. And particularly in America, they were saying that, hey, people just don't want to go back to work anymore. Now, fair enough, working conditions are terrible and money, the pay is crappy and you're competing for jobs that you just can't get. We probably hope, I mean, maybe you've seen the meme online of they want a 20-year-old with 10 years of experience in the field. Or 5 years of experience, fresh out of college. It's like, well, where are you supposed to get that experience from, right? How are you supposed to compete? And so there are reasonable reasons for people to not want to work, but that can be harmful to a country, right? To the productivity of a country. And think about it at your house. Like, what if you live with someone who doesn't want to do any of the chores, doesn't want to clean their dishes? Maybe that person's you. Maybe you don't clean your dishes. Maybe you pile them up in your room or you put them in the sink. How does that impact everyone else when you're not doing your job? John Stuart Mill is one of the important philosophers, wrote about the topic of liberty. He is against, what is this? The protection against, liberty being defined as the protection against the tyranny of political rulers. Okay, so he's big on freedom to keep you safe from government or leaders or rulers overreaching and telling you what to do with your life. Like maybe they say, hey, we hate this color, you can't wear that color again. Right? Or like, if you have glasses, you need glasses, too bad. We think glasses are terrible. No 4 eyes allowed, right? If they just start telling you how you can live your life. No, actually, you can't work out after school. You have to work out in the mornings only. No more basketball, because basketball takes away from education. Man, maybe some of us have parents like that. They don't want us playing sports or partaking in school events. My parents were like that because they thought, well, you should just be studying. Like my parents didn't want me working a job while I was in high school because to them, the most important thing was make sure you get good grades, study, and go to university. And maybe that's okay in your family, because at least you know them. But what if the government starts telling you stuff like that? Like all of you get a choice of where you would like to work, and that relates to how qualified you are to work there and how well you can convince that person to hire you. But what if the government just says, hey, if you're the age of 17 or 18, You have to work at the waste management center. You're gonna deal with garbage. How do we feel about that? And you're gonna get paid $15 an hour to do it. You know, or they tell you, you're shaking your head, no, he's doing this. It's not the move, right? It's not the vibe. We're not feeling that. Okay. The rise of democratic governments. With the rise of democratic governments comes the tyranny of the majority. That's mostly what the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, what these documents are designed, individual rights are designed to protect you against. What if you're one of the few people in your class who just doesn't want to participate because you disagree? So you have this freedom of conscience to disagree, to be your own individual person and to say, no, I actually don't want to do that. You can opt out, right? Now what's typically is going to happen is you're going to experience a lot of peer pressure. All your friends are going to tell you to do that thing. Maybe your parents, maybe the teachers, government. You know, again, on that note of the COVID lockdowns, vaccinations, all that, you know, 90% of the population got vaccinated, 10% of the population didn't want to for a variety of reasons. Are they free to make that choice for themselves? Are they free, autonomous individuals? Should they be allowed to make that decision for themselves? And if they're not, then we have to ask ourselves, well, what is the alternative? Do we just grab their arm and jab them? Just give them the medication? Like if you just simply say no, like, hey, you know, I don't feel comfortable with this. Interesting note on that. In America, a lot of black people were hesitant to take the vaccine. And if you know the history of the healthcare system and how it dealt with black people in America, you would understand. How many of you know about, it's kind of redundant to me to ask, how many of you know about the Tuskegee experiments? No way, you actually know what it, what's it about?
I saw these doctors injecting them with something.
With syphilis, right? I believe it was syphilis. So the Tuskegee experiments are these doctors kind of in the 60s, 70s, they asked black people, black participants to come in saying that they wanted to treat them for syphilis, which I can't remember right now how you get the disease. It might be an STD. And so these people went and participated. This is just one example. They went and participated in this experiment thinking it was going to help them and benefit them. Instead, these people were injected with this disease, were lied to, and then these doctors studied and watched, well, what does this disease do to a person over time? You're shaking your head, as you should. It's terrible. Right? Same with indigenous people in this country. There are so many stories of indigenous people having forced sterilization, which means their ability to have kids is taken from them. Medical procedures that are done against their will for a variety of reasons. And so, you know, should people have that freedom of conscience that even if 99% of people are doing something, I can still choose to say no? Are you free to make that decision for yourself? I think I've spoken enough on that. A couple of things that John Stuart Mill argued for is free speech. He's in favor of it. Obviously with the caveat that you can't incite people to violence. Right, so you're free to say that you hate a particular group, but the second you say that, hey, you should take your hate and you should act on it by hurting those group people, no, that's unacceptable. Right? You can't take away their safety. Individuality, it's a positive expression. Everyone has their own personal preferences and tastes and needs to pursue them to grow. Does our school system feel like that? Like you get to pursue what interests you? You can say no.
There's some gloves in here, though.
And part of that's because it's a small school, right? If you're at a bigger school with 50 to 100 staff members, you're going to see a lot more options for students to pursue their interests, right? But is it important for an individual for you to pursue your interests? Does it give your life more meaning and enjoyment? should your life be full of meaningful and enjoyable things. Trade, he also spoke about laissez-faire is preferable, so leave alone. Actually learned something about that I gotta add in, which is slipping my mind, but it's not just leave alone. But leaving buyers and sellers alone will result in the cheapness and good quality of products. Right? And you're going to see a variety. Some people will choose to make cheap products that they can make quickly, sell a lot of. Other people will choose to make high quality products that take more time but last longer or better quality. These shoes, for example. Okay, government power should be limited and non-intervention. Government shouldn't step into your life. And the point he made there is that individuals are self-interested, and that doesn't change once they're in government. Yes?
Can I go to the bathroom?
Okay. You know, the interesting thing is, people who want a lot of government intervention, a lot of government control, power to the government, it's almost like they're forgetting that, hey, just because you're part of the government, it doesn't mean you're all of a sudden the Messiah, that you're Jesus and you're perfect. Or you're still a human being. And human beings are susceptible to flaws. Well, we're very flawed. We're susceptible to giving into those flaws. And so, how much power should the government have? This last point here, I believe wholeheartedly, too much bureaucracy leads to stagnation and a reduction in liberty. So bureaucracy is essentially state officials, not elected, making most of the decisions. It's a lot of administrative stuff. Bureaucrats, right? They're just filling paperwork and whatnot. Too much of that leads to stagnation. You can't grow, you can't develop. It gets in the way at times. Like certain rules with basketball, of how you can get to a game and who can go with you. Okay, wrapping up, some takeaways. So we see the rise of liberalism at the end of the Enlightenment, along with various revolutions. Now that people are free and considered equals, the next form of liberation that takes place is economic. Okay, that was economic liberalism, capitalism that we discussed in some of the earlier portions. The Industrial Revolution, despite its significant progress and advances, had its flaws. There was an overemphasis on economic freedom and keeping the government out of business, which created its own set of problems. The focus once again becomes liberation, but also progression. So it's good that they went on to this extreme end of freedom. The people are individuals, they're autonomous, they should make their own decisions, and government should stay out of decision making and let people be people. But as you do that, you start to see that society fragments in a sense that, we're not all capable of the same things. So some people are very capable of holding down their job, showing up consistently, saving money, making good decisions. Other people are not. And that's just part of the human experience, right? We vary on those scales. It's not enough to be free and have written documents stating so. There must be action taken as a society, often through the government, to ensure individuals are protected from too much self-interest. Right? So that issue becomes, what if someone is being tyrannical? What if they're being malicious and they're harming you with their self-interest, right? Particularly psychopathic people, they're very predatory. If there's not enough disagreeable people to deal with a psychopath in a community, those psychopaths will take over. For the record, psychopaths are 1 to 3% of the population. Right? So 1 to 3 out of every 100 people. But if everyone else is too agreeable, too nice, they won't be able to deal with those psychopaths, and they'll start corrupting everything. They'll make life difficult for everyone. Right? So how do you protect people from maliciousness and too much self-interest? It's essential that everyone be allowed to participate in society, that we seek to remove archaic systems and take more of a moderate approach to liberalism. Okay, we're going to wrap that up, and there are some lesson questions.